Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to invite you to this very important public lecture organized by the Humanities Institute. And right at the outset, we want to also thank Professor Saleem Badat, the senior researcher at the Humanities Institute, who has so graciously came forward and also proposed this very, very important lecture today. Just two or three things about the Humanities Institute. We are very blessed to have started this institute in 2019, and since 2019 it has gone from strength to strength. It has generated substantial funding for more than 14 distinct national, internationally linked research projects. Part of this very important initiative is to develop linkages and develop our networks also in the global south and especially on the African continent, basically for reasons of not only making our own research visible and more visible, and those of our collaborators nationally and internationally. In this regard, at this point, I just want to thank our sponsors of the Humanities Institute that have come forward to fund these projects, and among others, count the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, the Department of Science and Innovation South Africa, the International Development Research Centre Canada, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council Canada, the Spencer Foundation at the US, the Ford Foundation of the US, and our own National Research Foundation. With regard to the very important aspects of these projects, I may just mention that at present we are distinguishing between our focused research projects. Then these projects are run, initiated, managed, and also positioned within the Humanities Institute. Then we have catalytic projects also run by quite a number of our excellent researchers and research professors at the university, and among others, which include the very important NIHS Regional Doctoral School, our own College of Humanities Doctoral Academy, and the NIHSS College of Humanities and College of Humanities Postdoctoral Fellow project. We also have a number of affiliated projects of which we will be talking and elaborating in the course of 2013. Colleagues, it gives me great pleasure to introduce this program today and also to support and Professor Saleem Badat with the question and answer session. We want to thank our DVC, Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize, who has played such a significant role not only in the establishing of the Humanities Institute, but so many research innovation initiatives that are playing out and are busy growing in the College of Humanities, and also in terms of the international networks of these initiatives. Then Professor Mkhize will introduce Professor Badat. I myself will handle the question and answer session, and then we have Professor Nobushle Ndimanda Shlongwa, the Dean of Arts, who have also graciously offered us services to do the vote of thanks. Thank you so much, Professor Mkhize.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, good afternoon, and it is my singular honor to introduce Professor Saleem Badat, who is a research fellow, a research professor in the College of Humanities Institute. Professor Saleem Badat is a research professor in the Humanities Institute in the College of Humanities of the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He holds qualifications from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, which at the time was called the University of Natal, and Boston University, and a PhD in sociology from the University of York. Between 2014 and 2018, he was the first program director of international higher education and strategic projects at the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation in New York. His portfolio encompassed grant making in the arts and humanities to research universities in South Africa, Uganda, Ghana, Egypt, and Lebanon, and to Pan-African and Pan-Arab institutions. During this period, Professor Badat made grants of almost 1 billion rands to universities in Africa and the Middle East. Saleem began his career in 1989 at the University of the Western Cape, where he eventually became the director of its higher education policy unit. In 1999, he was appointed the first chief director. He was appointed the first chief executive officer of the Council on Higher Education, which advises the Minister of Higher Education and Training on higher education policy issues and is responsible for quality assurance in higher education. He worked very closely with Professor Kada Asmail and Dr. Naledi Pandor. In 2006, Saleem became Vice Chancellor of Rhodes University, the first Black South African to hold this post in 102 years. Committed to advancing equity, institutional transformation, and academic excellence. In 2004, he was awarded an honorary doctorate from the University of the Free State for outstanding achievements in the shaping of policies and practices of the higher education environment. In 2008, he received a second honorary doctorate from the University of York, his alma mater. In the same year, he received the Inya Taylor Exceptional Philanthropy Award in recognition of excellence and leadership in personal South African philanthropy. Rhodes University awarded him an honorary doctorate in 2015. Saleem is author of Black Student Politics, Higher Education and Apartheid, and Black Men, You Are On Your Own, co-author of National Policy and a Regional Response in South African Higher Education, and co-editor of Apartheid Education and Popular Struggles in South Africa. In 2012, Jacana Press and Brill published his latest book, The Forgotten People, Political Banishment Under Apartheid. And I'm pleased to also announce that very, very soon, the UKZN Press will be publishing another of his books, Tennis, Apartheid and Social Justice, in the early quarter of 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, we have in our midst a scholar, a social justice activist of very, very high caliber, and we are very pleased that he's going to be delivering the humanities lecture today. It is my pleasure, therefore, to invite Professor Saleem Badat to come to the podium to deliver the humanities lecture. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Molweni, Sanbonani, and thank you for the honor of delivering the 2022 College of Humanities lecture. My question is, how do we contest global North hegemony in knowledge creation in the arts, humanities, and social sciences, overcome Africa's subordinate position in global scholarship, and advance knowledge that serves Africa's needs? I will reflect on this question by addressing the issues of research on, for, within, and of Africa in the arts, humanities, and social sciences, what I will call AHSS. Unequal social relations shape who produces knowledge, whose and what knowledges are valued, privileged, and subordinated, in what languages knowledge is principally produced, who has voice and does not have voice, who publishes, and what is published. They also shape the knowledge orientations and agendas of universities in the global North and global South, and they impinge on the creation and dissemination of knowledge. Unequal relations in the field of knowledge in turn help reproduce unequal relations in economic and social spheres between the North and the South. Of course, there's not a straightforward reproduction of social relations. Those relations, the institutions, policies, and practices that are associated with them are contested, including in arenas in which knowledge is created, disseminated, and preserved. Recent years have seen struggles to contest hegemonic Western thinking on and approaches to knowledge. These struggles are critical for liberating scholarship from the old, tired, and pernicious orthodoxies that impede knowledge-making, arbitrarily value certain modes of knowledge, and constrain research and thought. They are critical, too, for creating African universities, as opposed to what we have currently, mimics and imitations of universities in the colonial metropoles. Whatever the shortcomings of movements like Rhodes Must Fall, they exemplify the struggle for epistemic and wider social justice as part of anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist, and democratic struggles. What is the purpose of undertaking AHSS research on Africa and issues related to Africa? The purpose is neither self-evident nor without dispute. One intention may be to advance understanding of our natural and social worlds and enrich our scientific and cultural heritage through producing new knowledge. Another purpose may be to grapple with contemporary and urgent problems and to seek solutions in the forms of policies and technologies. Beyond the question of purpose is that of interest. Whose interests does research on Africa serve? Whose interests are ignored? And whose interests should be served? Given the entanglement of knowledge and power, how is the public common good to be safeguarded in the face of the narrow private interests of dominant elites? Given the competition among social groups and nation states, what should be the concerns of research on Africa? What research should be prioritized? What should be key goals? What strategies should be used? And how should research be resourced? Should scholarship be concerned only or largely with economic competitiveness and growth, contemporary political and social problems, and questions of immediate relevance usually defined by governments? What priorities should universities and scholars give to critical inquiry on state conduct and failings? How about issues related to history, aesthetics, and culture? What are African goals, priorities, and questions are neither given nor obvious. They are ultimately the objects and outcomes of struggles between and within different classes, social groups, and institutions. And now turn to another question. Does research on Africa, whether undertaken in Africa or in the North, result in knowledge creation that is for Africa? Given that asymmetries between the global North and South reproduce inequalities in resources and infrastructure for research and publishing, does research on Africa address concerns, questions, and objects pertinent to Africans and advance African goals? We know that it often does not. At the same time, the question of research that is for Africa is not without its own problems. To be clear, knowledge-making that is for Africa is not the licensing of propaganda that masquerades as research, or of research that principally serves the narrow ends of elites. Advancing knowledge on and for Africa means that we must rigorously test the knowledge produced by previous generations, undertake research into the most arcane and abstract issues and the most theoretical and intractable uncertainties of knowledge, that we must grapple with urgent problems and seek solutions to those, but we must also delve into issues that are not immediately relevant to others, but have the potential to yield great future benefit. Above all, as scholars and universities, we must fearlessly ask questions, and in the spirit of truth, pursue those questions wherever they lead. At the same time, we should heed Edward Said's counsel. There is always something radically incomplete, insufficient, provisional, disputable, and arguable about humanistic knowledge. We should be critical of humanism in the name of humanism, not least because our experiences of Eurocentrism and empire reveal how humanistic thought has justified all kinds of abuses. Rather than promote parochial Afrocentrism or an unacceptable alternate universalizing, we must fashion a different kind of humanism that is cosmopolitan. We must approach it as an unsettling adventure in difference, in alternative traditions, in texts that need a new deciphering within a much wider context than has hitherto been given to them. Northern interest in research on Africa is often linked to ideas on internationalization, but they are not immune to national economic and political interests, foreign policy imperatives, and specific institutional interests. It also occurs within persistent asymmetries and practices that assume the superiority of Western modes of knowing and theorizing, and these severely confound equitable North-South relationships. We must insist on a different internationalization logic: social solidarity, global public good, respect for difference and diversity, social inclusion, reciprocity, and mutual benefit for scholars, countries, and continents. A commitment to research that is just not on Africa, but also for Africa, and advances African goals, priorities, and interests. That's what we should be demanding. Ultimately, knowledge for Africa requires forging strong networks amongst Africans, instead of relying only on partnerships with the global North, which are often driven by funding of research that is more important to them than to us. It also means being involved in international research networks and projects to give voice to priorities for research in African countries. However, research intended to serve northern interests does not make it inevitably detrimental to our southern interests. It need not be a zero-sum situation. Not all northern interests are illegitimate. And it is unreasonable, too, to expect northern institutions and research to entirely forsake their interests for just African interests. Research for Africa, too, need not be conducted in Africa or by Africans alone. The commitment of researchers to Africa, its sovereignty, its development, is more important than their location, birth, or origins. Research that is for Africa also cannot have Africa as its sole concern. Our research must theorize and analyze foreign policy and aid regimes of the United States, Europe, Russia, and China, the conduct of the United Nations, Bretton Woods institutions, and other global formations. That said, too many North-South relationships evince the dominance of Northern institutions and dominant perspectives and beliefs and practices that relegate Southern institutions to the status of junior partners, receivers of knowledge, and providers of talent or data. Genuine partnerships mean institutions and scholars from different countries working together equitably, reciprocally, and respectfully, appreciating that common effort can yield greater benefits than working separately. Scholars and institutions jointly identify questions and opportunities, and sensitively and diligently cultivate and sustain collaborations. They use their respective insights, their locations, their resources to exchange ideas authentically and achieve common goals. Power relations, asymmetries, unfortunate assumptions, and ingrained historical practices often make successful North-South partnership difficult, demanding, and elusive. A global economy of knowledge centered on elite institutions of the metropole is a massive fact. It shapes both established disciplines and new domains. It affects training, funding, research methods, publication, prestige, and recognition. The concepts academic dependency and extraversion denote how Global South scholars are orientated to and dependent on the institutions, concepts, and techniques of the Northern metropole. And the ways in which the intellectual labor process in the Global South is arranged around relationships in which the Global North knowledge institutions have predominant authority. This authority may be exercised directly, as when Global North funders define the problems for researchers in the South, or indirectly through such practices as researching within an established methodological framework or teaching curricula modeled on those of Northern universities. Global South scholars, however, are not merely hapless, passive victims of extraversion. Individuals and institutions contest and push back against unequal relations. They creatively exploit opportunities and they advance knowledge from the Global South. Jess Auerbach notes that the forms of research practice that we now take for granted today were in fact integral to the processes of European domination of global knowledge systems. The well-being of the majority of the planet has been compromised by the dominance of one culture of knowledge and knowing, the European one. Auerbach advances thoughtful ideas for more equitable knowledge practices around the globe. First and foremost, a decolonization of the mind is needed. We must recognize the extent to which almost all of us who work at universities have been shaped by received notions of excellence and expectations. Second, we need historical awareness of both dominant and contesting histories of place, space, and relationships. Third, we need the decolonization of data, because unless access to outputs, servers, technologies, research sites, materials, and conferences is made more inclusive, Southern scholars will remain marginalized. However, if Eurocentrism is not to reign supreme, we also need a diversity of lenses through which this data is interpreted. Epistemological, theoretical, and methodological innovation is critical if the deleterious, constraining, distorting, and obfuscating effects of received or imposed Western perspectives are to be overcome. Fourth, to fight gatekeeping, a decolonization of expertise is also required. Expertise comes in many forms and from many different journeys through knowledge systems, and not only through university credentials. Finally, we need inclusive teams and a substantive diversity that is not just skin deep. To address the scars of history, we need to pay attention to class, gender, race, body type, neurodiversity, physical ability, age, parenthood, and much more. We also need to cultivate a place of relationship, care, and commitment to eliminating inequality, upholding dignity, and all leading rich, rewarding, healthy, and secure lives. Beyond the questions of research on Africa and for Africa is a question of research with African universities and scholars. This means meaningfully involving African scholars and students who possess theoretical, methodological, and empirical insights shaped by our place and by our space. And it means contributing to building institutional capacities and individual research capabilities. While research on Africa could be the priority, collaboration with African universities should not be limited entirely to AHS's research on Africa, even if this research is for Africa. Globalization and neoliberalism have accentuated old economic and social problems and have triggered new problems at local, national, and global levels. If planetary changes have especially acute implications for Africa, they are global in nature. The vast and complex challenges that confront humanity today must be studied collectively and from multiple perspectives, not just from a Western perspective. The arts, humanities, and social sciences can play a crucial role of translation and communication for the public at large. This requires collaboration between and across the arts, humanities, and social sciences, the natural sciences, and other sciences. It also requires a transnational and global concept of public interest and public good. It is trite that arts, humanities, social science research on Africa must occur principally in Africa and be undertaken by Africans. Yet, AHS research is poorly funded in most African countries, and few dedicated research centers exist. Social science publishing output has been rising, but Africa's contribution is just 7.6% of world output. Between 2001 and 2008, Africa produced 508,000 scientific publications, a fraction of the global world output. 10 countries in Africa produced 84% of publications. 10 countries produced 84. A small number of universities on the continent and within countries produce most of the knowledge. The majority of it coming from about 7 or 8 universities in South Africa. Apart from inadequate public support for universities, the social sciences and the arts and humanities especially experience significant challenges. The quest to harness universities for economic and political advantage means that knowledge generated by the natural, medical, and business sciences and engineering is privileged. The perverse obsession with global rankings reinforces such privileging. The arts and humanities are either benignly tolerated or outrightly neglected. The late outstanding Thandika Makwandere rightly bemoaned that attempts to improve Africa's prospects by focusing on scientific advances all too often overlook the important perspectives which the arts and humanities afford. They must be cultivated to fully and properly address Africa's development challenges and to counter a developmentalism in which research prioritizes economic and technological issues and ignores other aspects of our people's lives, as we have witnessed in the discourse today on the so-called Fourth Industrial Revolution. As Makandewari argues, our people's spiritual concerns, their history, their sense of identity, their intellectual and aesthetic aspirations, all these are marginalized or even banished from a discourse whose primary concern is development. Here, I cannot dwell on the critical contribution of the arts and humanities to culture and society. Suffice to say, they interpret human activity and history in its rich variety. They presented it in multitudinous forms, and they conserve it in the form of archives. They are the grounds on which humanity constructs the image of and discourse about itself, and in which it anchors human dignity and collective understanding. The work of the arts and humanities must be advanced in tandem with that of the sciences if we are going to have a hospitable world. Key tasks in the arts and humanities and social sciences are, first, to cultivate and sustain institutional capacities for education and scholarship. Second, to promote innovative decolonial curriculum and pedagogic initiatives. Third, to build postgraduate programs that produce outstanding graduates. Fourth, to support research institutes, centers, units, programs, and projects. And fifth, to strengthen scholarly collaboration, networks, and publishing. Of course, it must begin with rigorous, thoughtfully designed and implemented undergraduate programs, taught by dedicated scholars that enabled our students to graduate with the capability to think theoretically and imaginatively, to gather and analyze information with rigor, to critique and construct alternatives, and to communicate effectively, orally, and in writing. If we don't have this, we provide students physical access, but we deprive them of epistemological access. And we deprive them of meaningful opportunities and success, and we promote narrow private interests, but not the public common good. The critical actors and agents of renewal, development, transformation must, of course, be African scholars, universities, national states, and Pan-African institutions. I want to conclude with the question of research that is not only on and for Africa, conducted by and with African scholars and institutions, and undertaken principally in Africa, but that is also of Africa. Colonialism and apartheid, and their associated conquest, occupation, extermination, subjugation, dispossession, exploitation, dehumanization, exclusion, and marginalization, rationalized on the basis of ideas about race and civilization, not only wreaked havoc on indigenous and black people physically, they also impacted thinking and thought, particularly how the dominated came to acquire knowledge, understand their history, comprehend their world, and define themselves. The concept of coloniality draws attention to the Eurocentric epistemology, ontology, and ideology that underpin and legitimize European domination and knowledge with its colonial epistemic monoculture, to the decimation, erosion, and marginalization of the knowledges, cultures, languages, and experience of colonized people. Post-colonial and decolonial scholars have highlighted the problems of European epistemology. First, predicated on an imperialist and racist outlook and power linked to colonial domination, European epistemology unilaterally assumed the right to stipulate to all of us what knowledge was, how it was produced, proclaiming its scientific truths universal and valid across all time and space. Eurocentrism was constituted of the geoculture of the modern world and powerfully shaped science and knowledge in universities everywhere, including South Africa. The European claim of the universality of its ideas conveniently erases its own specificity and particularity. It also obscures how this claim is sustained through the exercise of material power in the world, and the ways in which relations of power underpin both knowledge and the possibilities of producing knowledge. Eurocentrism impedes human understanding because, in Edward Said's words, its misleadingly skewed historiography, the parochiality of its universalism, its unexamined assumptions about Western civilization, and its attempt to impose a uniform directed theory of progress, all of these end up reducing rather than expanding the possibility of Catholic inclusiveness, of genuine cosmopolitan or internationalist perspective, of intellectual curiosity. Second, education based on Western canonical thought erases the traditions of others. It must therefore be subjected to radical humanistic critique. Saeed has noted that academic disciplines, field, and curricula were shaped by social struggles. The struggles of fields like African, gender, critical race, and post-colonial studies for representation at universities demonstrates the parochialism of classical Eurocentric humanistic thought. The exclusion of such fields displays, too, the disregard for the historical experiences of women and disadvantaged and marginalized groups. Third, Western Enlightenment thought not only positions itself as the wellspring of universal learning of science and philosophy, it conveniently regards the non-West, us, primarily as places of parochial wisdom, of antiquarian traditions, of exotic ways and means, of unprocessed data and reservoirs of raw fact, from which Euromodernity might fashion its testable theories and transcendental truths, its axioms and its certitudes, its premises, postulates, and principles. Consequently, and fourth, scholars from the global south like ourselves are considered to be tokens of their culture, while global north scholars are theoretically minded people. On this assumption, the global north has knowledge. The global south has culture. First peoples have wisdom. Northerners have science. Of course, this epistemic dependency of countries and of their scholars and intellectuals is not an original state, but the product of colonial subjugation and unequal relations over centuries. Fifth, given how scholarship on Africa and by Africans is hampered by the preferences, the policies, and politics of the Western Academy, it is not surprising that we only operate at a fraction of our real potential. Given global North hegemony and entrenched Eurocentrism, Walter Mignolo advocates for political and epistemic delinking, and for decolonizing knowledge and decolonial knowledges as necessary steps to imagining and building democratic, just, non-imperial and non-colonial societies. Delinking means jettisoning Eurocentrism and its assimilative and isomorphic rationalities. It cannot, however, be a turn to nativism that harks back to some pure and glorious past, or an anachronistic nationalism. Instead, it must appropriate, subsume, and redefine the emancipatory rhetoric of modernity in order to understand citizenship, democracy, economic relations, human rights, and humanity beyond the narrow definitions of European modernity. It is a basis for which to study Africa from inside and to generate endogenous intellectual discourses and thus enable Africans to speak for themselves, about themselves, in a non-hegemonic conversation with the rest of the world. In this sense, delinking or unthinking alterity offers opportunity for a decolonial turn in African scholarship, which is much needed. A decolonial epistemic perspective requires a broader canon of thought than simply the Western canon. It should be the result of a critical dialogue between diverse critical, epistemic, ethical, and political projects towards a pluriversal as opposed to a universal world. Decolonial thinking and knowing becomes a contestation of imperial, disembodied, and unlocated assumptions about knowledge and knowledge-making, and an unveiling of the hidden geo- and biographical politics of knowledge of imperial epistemology. The knower, those of us who are doing research, is always implicated geo- and body politically in the known. Modern epistemology conceals both and builds the figure of the scholar as this detached observer, a neutral seeker of truth and objectivity, who at the same time controls the disciplinary rules and puts himself or herself in a privileged position to evaluate and to dictate. Yet we always speak from a particular location in the power structures. Nobody escapes the class, sexual, gender, spiritual, linguistic, geographical, and racial hierarchies within which we are all located. Knowledge making is about location and situated and embodied knowledges, not about transcendence and splitting of subject and object. The post-colonial and decolonial critique of the social relations of global knowledge production and its impact on the global South is telling and valid. So what is to be done? For Ramon Grossvogel, a horizontal, liberatory dialogue as opposed to a vertical Western monologue requires decolonization of global power relations. That is absolutely true. But currently, we are some distance from that. Mignolo's idea of political delinking has merit, but it's hard to envisage states, universities, and scholars in Africa doing so. Let us be honest. Optimal strategy currently may be for us as scholars, universities, and Pan-African institutions, and supporters in the global north to mobilize on various fronts and in different ways. For global north humility about their knowledge claims and an end to epistemological colonization. The de-imperialization of epistemology, theory, and methodology. The decolonization of knowledge. And global South inclusion and access at all stages of research as critical preconditions for knowledge sharing and research participation. If de-imperialization is principally the work of progressive scholars and institutions in the global north, decolonization is principally the task of Africans. No one is going to do it for us. We have to do it for ourselves. The challenge for African scholars is to formulate and apply intellectual theories and categories that draw on African conditions and the concrete experience of us as African historical agents. The challenge for universities seeking to become African, because they are not African at the moment, is to build new academic and institutional cultures that genuinely respect epistemological difference and diversity and social justice in the making of knowledge. For Boaventura Santos, there is much abyssal thinking that grants to modern science the monopoly of the universal distinction between true and false, to the detriment of alternative bodies of knowledge. This results in global cognitive injustice. The struggle for global social justice must therefore be a struggle for cognitive justice too. For Shiv Viswanathan, diversity is crucial for cognitive justice, and a diversity of knowledges unmuseumized and dialogic is an anchor for inventive democratic imagination. Pursuing cognitive justice means being alert not only to other forms of knowledge, but also to the diverse communities of problem solving. Democratic imagination is exercised where conversation, reciprocity, translation create knowledge, not as an expert, almost zero sum of the world, but as a collaboration of memories, legacies, heritages, and manifold heuristics of problem solving. We require creative scholarship in Africa that deconstructs the standard narratives based upon the universalization of parochial European histories, that provincializes ideas that are based on European experience, but that are universalized globally, that reconstructs global narratives on the basis of empirical connections forged through histories of colonialism, enslavement, dispossession, and appropriation, and builds counter-hegemonic understandings and uses of Eurocentric concepts such as human rights, the rule of law, democracy, and socialism. Undertaking this work is much more than about geography or social location. It is fundamentally about thinking, researching and writing from a decolonial epistemic location. It's not good enough just being based in Africa and South Africa. In conclusion, advancing scholarship in the arts, humanities, and social sciences that is of and for Africa requires scholars, universities, and research institutions in the global South and those in the global North who express solidarity to forge principles, strategies, and tactics to overcome Northern hegemony in knowledge making. This is an enormous yet necessary task. In Said's words, it requires intellectual performances on many fronts, in many places, many styles that keep in play both the sense of opposition and the sense of engaged participation. This work involves not a single great intellectual, a master thinker endowed with the sole resources of his or her singular thought. Rather, it calls for the collective intellectual, shifting collections of thinkers and actors who work on common questions and play an irreplaceable role by helping us to create the social conditions for the collective production of realist utopias. Alongside these coordinated efforts, there is always scope for everyday acts of resurgence by scholars, universities, and other actors who are committed to an equitable new global knowledge order and a new social order. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very thought-provoking lecture, Prof. We really appreciate that. Colleagues, just to maybe highlight one or two points that Prof has raised that I think might be open for further reflection, and then we can also raise some comments or questions. The first point that Prof raised was obviously that point, that very important issue that Ngugi wa Thiong'o raised so long ago already, the decolonizing of the mind, which is so central to the whole decoloniality discourse in Africa. And if we talk about research and knowledge generation with, for, by Africa, for Africa. The second one that he raised referred to space-place relations. Many of the spaces, relations, and place that we experience in Africa, also in our university systems, research systems, have been inherited from colonial times, and in South Africa also from apartheid systems and apartheid times. And this includes some of our systems that we have in the country in the higher echelons of knowledge creation. So we need, I think, raise questions about that. Then with regard to the question of integration and what Prof has raised, namely the question of what a global public sphere would look like if we talk about a globally integrated public sphere. How does that accommodate issues that we are raising about race, about gender, about class, about forms of inclusion and exclusion that exist, forms of subjugation of identities and so on. Then obviously the question about the decolonization of the university systems themselves, and then also the question that Prof has raised so powerfully, namely the structures that exist, the power structures, the knowledge structures, the knowledge producing structures in the world that we do have to raise questions about. He also mentioned that it calls for interventions by diverse actors. So that also raises the question of ourselves as knowledge generation, people participating in knowledge generation of, with, for, and our global south, and for the interests of the people of the global south and in Africa. Colleagues, with those few words, any comments or questions that anybody would like to raise? I think we do have a roaming mic here. Who is the person that has the roaming mic there? Thank you very much. There is a question there, please. There are 2 mics there. Just speak in the mic so that we all can hear.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like, first of all, I would like to thank Professor for a very inspiring presentation. And at the same time, again, I would like also to thank Prof. Mkize. Since I've known him and his consistency on decolonization, so that gives one hope that one day that Africa, because of consistency, Africa may come to a point where it's fully decolonized, and if all of us that we buy into the idea. So while these ideas, that this idea is noble and is moving toward a better change that we all desire. So I have sometimes that I have fear, and that is also that one of my concern. When are we going to go to very practical project, which will be what we translate, what we discuss can be translated into actions. And this is one of my worry. And again, as Prof clearly indicated, he clearly indicated the issues of what the methodological approach, and also that I have question, and which also that I may be assisted to understand. So the question that is the methodological approach that we use in conducting research and producing knowledge in the African context. So the approach that we use at the universities, that is a Western-driven approach. And that brings me back again to a study that I conducted, and I produced a documentary on indigenous approach on dispute resolution and court proceedings. So, but I discovered this particular group of indigenous people, they have unique method, and they have approach that they use in coming to conclusion. So, but using the Western approach method in investigating African knowledge in African context, that I found that sometimes there may be some kind of clash. So, but it's just I'm trying just to get clarity. How can we go about this? So, in brief, those are 2 questions that I would like just to share. And thank you very much for presentation, Prof.
Thank you. Prof, can I take one more question, or would you like to respond? Okay, good, that's fine. Can we take one more question, please, or one more comment? Maybe if you could respond, Prof.
So, absolutely agree with you. We need practical projects too, right? While we theorize, while we analyze, while we critique, we must also engage on the ground, okay? And that's what I mean by everyday resurgences, whether at the level of an individual scholar, at the level of students, at the level of a deputy vice chancellor, and so on. And those resurgences can be the Humanities Institute as a start. The fact that we have created something like that. The fact of decolonial summer schools that happened here in January. The kinds of things that the Center for Creative Arts puts on all over this province and so on, okay? All those things may not be dramatic. They're not going to change the world tomorrow, but they're all part of processes, because decolonization is a process. It's not an event. It's not going to happen like a big bang. okay? And in that process, as we learn, we share, some things work, some things don't work, we collaborate with people in other parts of Africa, and so on, okay? So it means hard work of a very practical kind. It means setting up centers, institutes, doctoral academies, as are happening at this institution and in this area and so on. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because sometimes we forget that our theorizing is in order to inform practice, right? We just theorize for the sake of theorizing, to show how good we are, how smart we are, but we don't get our hands dirty. So we have to get our hands dirty by fighting for resources, for mobilizing support, for starting practical projects, whether they're centers, institutes, whatever they are. So I'm glad you raised that, because that's what it's going to take to change the unequal relations currently. If we don't do it for ourselves, if we don't create the resources ourselves, no one in the North is going to do it. There's too much at stake. They're quite comfortable, thank you very much. Okay? So I'm glad you raised the thing of that. On the methodological approaches, you also gave a wonderful example of the kinds of things that are being used in different places in Africa and so on. Yet we seem to be shy to think and share those ideas. We seem to be shy to theorize them. We seem to be shy to write about them and publish. Or when we try and do some of those things, they are gatekeepers. They're not interested in this, because the way they do it is the only way, right? And look how we accommodate to that too, right? I don't know about this university, but I know another university which I was vice chancellor of, where I challenged the people in music about why they call something ethnomusicology. Because I say to them, if an idea comes from some remote area in Sweden like Lund, they don't call it ethno, they just call it knowledge. But somehow we feel so inferior that we can only claim that by calling it ethno something. Look how we damage ourselves. I mean, look how we manifest our own subordination, right? So I think we must search out those methodological approaches, and we must start to think about them, highlight them, contest them to other approaches that we find that are received through colonial thinking and so on. If we don't do it, no one's going to do it for us.
Thank you, Prof. Any other comments or questions, colleagues? I think Prof raised another very important issue that I need to maybe unpack a bit further. Prof raised the issue of the so-called splitting of the subject, namely the distinction in research between subject and object. Now, I do not want to trace this history of the distinguishing between the subject and object in research, and the whole question about how to objectify what you study in research in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. Prof did mention the issue also of the natural sciences, which makes it very complex, because it raises a number of questions, namely whether the natural sciences and the progress that we have seen in the world in the natural sciences and how the whole world has benefited from it, about from technologies that have been developed, about how we as Africans articulate with this history, with this reality, but how we do research on, with, for, by, from, and of Africa within this knowledge or this legacy of making a distinction between subject and object. Who is the subject? Who is the object? What is the object to be objectified, problematized, and how is the knowledge being generated and produced? Prof, this is a very big question, but I would like your comments on it, and maybe also the DVC has also indicated that he would like to respond to that. Prof, shall we first go to you, Professor Mkhize?
Thank you very much, Program Director. And thank you very much, Prof. Badat, for a very exciting lecture that you have delivered this afternoon, a very refreshing lecture. Mine is a question concerning the intellectualization of African languages and their position in the higher education and maybe even the basic education landscape. Because we know for a fact that African languages thrived during apartheid. Paradoxically, they thrived during apartheid. That's when they were flourishing. And now, post-1994, we have seen a situation where African languages are coming, in fact, very close to dying. And thanks to some initiatives, there are scholarly initiatives to intellectualize them. So I would like to hear from you, what are your thoughts on the intellectualization of African languages and what happened post-1994? And what is the role of the African middle class towards the intellectualization and international visibility of African languages as languages of science, technology, and global discourse, including commerce? Thank you very much.
Prof, we are so fortunate to also have Professor Slongwa here. Prof, after Professor Badat, maybe if you can make a few comments, we would be most, it would be most welcome, Prof. Badat.
So let me start with the intellectualization of African languages, because this is precisely an area that we provided when I was at Rhodes in about 2010 and when there was a call as part of infrastructure and efficiency funding. There was a very exciting program produced where Rhodes was quite strong in African language, especially to Russell Kashula, and occupied the NRF chair, the research chair in that area. And we proposed to the Department of Higher Education Training, that proposal is still probably around somewhere, about working together with other universities to get to a point where we could perhaps offer history or certain subjects in Xhosa or Zulu or Sotho. So let me speak bluntly here, because this is something that really angers me. Because I'm tired of people talking and talking, a good talk, but never putting the money on the table. All right? They agree with you how important this is, but when it comes to putting the money on the table, they don't put the money on the table. And it wasn't a lot of money that was requesting. But what it was requesting is collaboration between those of us at universities and PanSal and dictionary units and so on. Because as you know, people often say, well, there aren't even words for certain things. Well, we can create the words. We've got enough smart people who will tell us what the word for capital is, if it doesn't exist in Xhosa or Zulu, right? Afrikaners did it. Let's acknowledge that. There was no language called Afrikaans. There was even a struggle between Afrikaners around whether Dutch or Afrikaans as an emerging language should be supported. But Afrikaans was not only developed, Afrikaans became a language of higher education and science. We should acknowledge that. In fact, Mahmoud Mandani argues, and I think we can debate this, that Afrikaans is a decolonial language. Some of us may not want to accept that, but I think it's worth talking about that, because he then contrasts it with, how come Swahili hasn't become that? How come other indigenous languages haven't become that? Okay? And I want to remind people that in 2001, while we had the size and shape exercise happening that resulted in the merger of Durban Westville and Natal University, that resulted us creating 23 universities from the original 36, there was another very important task team that no one seems to talk about. I know, because I convened it. as the head of the advisory body to the minister. And it was headed by one of the most profound persons in language, Neville Alexander, who is now late. And the report is still there. It was given to the minister. And it simply said, there's two ways to go. Either we go the monolingual dominance of English route, and in that process we also destroy Afrikaans as a language in higher education, or we celebrate the fact that Afrikaans exists and there should be some universities that teach in Afrikaans. Because the third largest community of speakers is Afrikaans, not even English. English is fourth. Or we go that other route where we really start to cultivate our indigenous languages. And if we start in 2001, maybe we will have made a lot of progress, as we said, by 2026, 25 years' time. Well, Prof is still asking the same question today, 21 years later. What progress have we made? And why is it that those who are in power and in government are not prepared to commit to the cultivation of Xhosa, Zulu, and so on? So we can anticipate the political hot potato here. But we can get around that, surely. Right? And secondly, I think Prof raises an important question. The black middle class, the black elites, who want their kids to be taught in English because they know that the language of power in the corridors of politics and business is English. Even though all the research shows that you learn better in mother tongue, that you do better if you start there and then move to, I can see it physically over the weekend in Tulani Mkhize, who was meant to do the vote of thanks here, outstanding young early career scholar's child, and how she's going to make that transition very easily because of the solid grounding in Zulu. Okay? So we've had choices, and I think we have to ask hard questions of why we haven't made certain decisions. And I think it does come down to interests. It's the interests of elites who want to pursue a certain path in this country. And unfortunately, in that process, working class people, rural poor people, when they see that, they say, that must be right. You want the poor to be taught in Zulu and Xhosa and so on, while the rich send their kids to private schools and Model C schools to be taught in English. We have to start being honest about some of these things in this country, whether all our interests are the same, irrespective of whether we're black people. Or actually our interests are very different because of class and what we see as the good society. We're not having enough of these discussions because race always is trumping, unfortunately, other complex issues that we should be speaking about, such as class and gender and so on. So I don't know if it's the same issue. I'll come back to the other issue. Yeah.
Thanks, Prof. Thank you very much, Prof. Shlongwa. I might just mention that there is a question there. Can we just wait? Do you want to respond immediately? Or shall we just give Prof. Shlongwa a chance to make a comment? Prof, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and thank you very much, Prof. Badat, for an interesting presentation this afternoon. I think maybe I will just add to what you have shared with us with regard to the issues of intellectualization of African languages in higher education, because that is my interest and also my research interest. Whilst our South African government, or let me say the Department of Higher Education and Training, has come up with various policies, language policies, to assist higher education institutions to come up with their own language policies. I must agree with Prof. Badat that things have been really, really very slow. We were expecting that after the NRF research chair in Rhodes University, which Russell Kachula hold, there were going to be many of such chairs that were going to be funded across the universities to support the intellectualization of African languages. That hasn't happened. Right now, University of Western Cape has a new research chair. Let me remember what's the name of the chair. It's on forensic linguistics. They have a new research chair on forensic linguistics, and we want to see more of those in various universities. I remember when Rhodes University got that NRF chair, I think as UKZN, Prof is sitting here next to me, my DVC, we had also submitted a similar proposal as UKZN. Our proposal was also came very highly recommended, but because they only had one chair that was given to Rhodes University. So I am happy that within the College of Humanities, within the School of Arts, we have advertised our own chair, which will focus on Mazisugunene chair. We're calling it Mazisugunene chair, and that chair will contribute towards the intellectualization of African languages. And maybe just to comment briefly as well, on the expectation of higher education institutions, there is a new language policy framework. I will say new, but like it was gazetted in 2020, that expects higher education institutions not only to promote one African language, but now two. So currently, most of the higher education institutions have language policies that may have maybe English, Afrikaans, and maybe one or two African languages. So that framework is now saying universities now promote and develop at least two African languages. So we will see, we have been monitoring that. So there have been various workshops that have been guided through the work of USAF, through COPAL, which is the Committee of Practice for the Teaching of African Languages in Higher Education. So we're monitoring that across all the universities, even our own university, UKZN. We are in the final stages of revising the language policy of the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So soon it will go to the formal structures, our Senate, our schools, and also our students will engage with the policy because it addresses a very critical question, that of the importance of African languages in knowledge production. So that's key, and I don't think that to go and pursue the decolonial 10 Prof. Badat is talking about, we will continue and succeed to do that if we leave African languages behind. So African languages should be part and parcel of our transformation, of our decolonization. We should bring those African languages with us as we move forward. Let me stop there, Chair. Thank you very much.
Prof, thank you so much. There was another hand there. Please go ahead. Yes, just tell us who do you direct the question? Oh, it's Prof. Zulu. Welcome, Prof. So glad to see you. Welcome.
Well, I think my age allows me to talk sitting down. I'm not new to this audience. I listened for the entire talk in my office through YouTube, and if I had known it was this near, I would have come straight from the beginning. What Prof. Badat has said, to me, I agree with entirely, but there are certain things which I find puzzling. And I think I find this puzzling because of the terminology that we are using. Most of the work we do, from the thinking processes to anything, we graft. Why do I say we graft? Because historically, or because of precedence, the university came here when it had existed elsewhere. And the curriculum came here when it had existed elsewhere, and came in the form of those who brought it in. I find the terms decolonization, this, a bit problematic. And I wonder if we substituted them with syncretization. Now, syncretization was a practice that Africans practiced from times immemorial. You had a certain type of medicine for treating X, and Y had a certain type of medicine for treating X, and probably Y's medicine tended to be much more effective than yours, and then you took and he took. So that's called syncretism. Because to me, the term decolonization becomes not only polarizing politically, I don't mind that, but intellectually. How do you decolonize a university, which is both a structure and an institutional ensemble, and still call it a university? What will it be if you decolonized it and did not syncretize it? That's my main question that I always find fundamentally problematic. And the second thing is that these terms carry a political, emotive connotation which becomes very easy to sidestep and continue with the power structures. And I think this is the reason why Africa has failed to decolonize, because they have not decolonized. They have changed names and left the power structures and the institutions as they are. Probably they couldn't do otherwise. Take the question of the state, for instance. Where the state did not exist in its current form, we complain every day that our boundaries are artificial, that they separated brother from brother. We still adopt the same boundaries. You become the president of the boundaries that colonialism created because it's functional to you, or because you cannot dismember the state in the form that it is. So I think to a certain extent we have to go back into the very problem statement. What is it that we want to do? And what is the appropriate terminology or concept of that which we want to do? That's my first, or probably it's in a question form as well as in a commentary.
Thanks, Prof. You raised quite a number of issues that are quite relevant. Prof, would you like to respond, please?
So the first thing I should say, I think this is a sign, because I just got your cell phone number recently to ask you to write the foreword to my book that's coming out on tennis, apartheid, and social justice that he mentioned earlier. The foreword. You know why you are suitable to write the foreword. The preface, if you like, the foreword. We'll talk. Right. So this is a sign, as I say, because I was going to phone you. Now I can talk to you directly. And why you are suitable, you know, because you were involved with transformation in tennis. But we've never met. I was asking him who was the gentleman as you walked in. I thought it might be you. So to get to your comment, question, no disagreement. Like you, I anguish about whether decolonization is the right term. And others are anguishing. And those who subscribe to the decolonial school, if they don't like hearing that, so be it. But I don't want a new orthodoxy that dulls my head, because we need to think about even the terms that we use and so on. So for me, the idea of decolonization is a starting point. Let's interrogate what we mean by that, and the failures of so-called decolonization too, right? And when it comes to the university, what precisely are we talking about? Maybe we need to, maybe it's a catch-all phrase, but we've got to really argue about this and also accept that these are processes. And they need to be not just practical processes, they need to be informed by intellect. And so I like this idea of syncretism, Because the other thing that Edward Said reminds us of, that when we invent, when we reinvent, we don't do it on a blank slate. We assemble things from the best from everywhere, right? And if the best can come from somewhere else, let's borrow that in order to forge something new. Because it's not just going to fall out of our heads. We can only proceed from what exists. Like Amilcar Cabral says, we proceed with our feet firmly on the ground from what is what exists, and we build on that, right? So I think you're quite right to warn us about that. And in another article, I deliberately tried not to use this term. So instead of talking about decolonizing the curriculum, I looked back into our own struggle history and said, liberating the curriculum from the orthodoxies of Eurocentrism and so on, right? Because liberation is a word we know. And decolonization is tainted, as Fanon warns us, with too many things, okay? So I think we have to innovate the grammar, the vocabulary, the language, the discourse, and not just borrow uncritically. And it's a process that all of us have to be involved in, right? Because we don't want new orthodoxies that stifle us again. And it's too easy for that to happen. So I think your caution is really very important. And when people talk about decolonization, I also ask myself, are we substituting that? Are we talking about indigenizing? Are we talking about Africanizing? Are we talking about something else? Can we, decolonizing is just such a big and general word. We need to give it more content. And when it comes to decolonizing the university, I would like to talk about deracializing the university, both intellectually and demographically, of also demasculinizing. But I'm also aware that some of them who talk about decolonizing are not happy about the demasculinizing part because they're very patriarchal themselves, right? So is that what we're talking about? So I think we must really scratch and come to an agreement through argument and through reason, through drawing on our history and so on. What is this thing that we are talking about? At the moment, it's a slogan. We need to really theorize, intellectualize it, because if we don't do that, we may end up in other problems. And we may destroy the university in the process, because this institution called the university cannot absorb everything. At some point, it stops being a university. It becomes something else. And I'm not sure that's what we want to do by decolonizing. So I take your warnings very seriously. If I can just go on to the other issue that you raised about subject and object. I think that's something we should also be talking about. And especially in the arts and humanities, we cannot have that split between, in the sciences perhaps, you know, but maybe even there, right? Because the object is something inanimate sometimes. In the humanities and arts, we're working with subjects all the time. And the questions we ask, the approaches we use are shaped by our histories, by where we come from, by whether we are man or woman. That's why feminist theory and that's why queer theory and so on is so important, because they queer the questions we ask. They ask questions that sometimes men are not capable of asking. And in that sense, they enrich it, because it all begins with questions. The answers will come later. It's the questions that are important, right? That's why those of you who are doing PhDs, you know, no apologies. That's why we tell you sometimes you're going to take 9 months to formulate the proposal before you can go out into the field. Because you're not ready to go out in the field after coming up with some question, you know, here and there. Let's get serious. If we want to have a proper PhD and a solid PhD, it takes time to formulate the proposal. Because otherwise you're going to run all over the country, never knowing what exactly you're working on. The questions are important. Otherwise, you may think you're going to Cape Town, but you may end up in Mozambique. If you're not clear about what is it that you are meant to be doing and so on. So, yeah, we don't have that ability to split subject and object in the arts and humanities and so on. I think artists will also tell you that, you know. We are working with other humans. And the other point I want to pick up, Yanni, you mentioned it in your summary also. And I would like to see the Humanities Institute and UKZN here really thinking much more about this. We need to start not collapsing, but we need to start to think together as not just the arts. I mean, even in this college, I wonder if there's enough thinking happening between art and social sciences, because they're not the same, right? Arts, humanities, and social. Is there enough thinking across even our college in terms of arts, humanities, and social sciences? Because artists bring something else to us. They are creative people, and so on. They can really enrich us social scientists, right? The same with humanities can enrich us in other ways, right? But that's one part. Are we talking and working enough with people in the sciences, in biology, with people in engineering, in architecture, town planning, and so on? So let me give you one example. Here's the question. How do we create a safe, secure eThekwini or center of Durban that women and children can all walk around safely, whether it's 1 in the morning or at any time of the day? Is that an impossible hope? If it's an impossible hope, then we've given up too early. It should be our vision, the ability to walk the streets, and not for the reasons that apartheid enabled us to do that, right? Because we did have those kinds of streets, but we forget how they were created, and they were policed and regulated. We're talking now in a democracy. How do you have that safe space and streets? What I can tell you, and you know this, I'm sorry, the architects cannot produce that for us. The town planners cannot produce that for us. The engineers who build roads and buildings and all that cannot produce that for us. You need to have a conversation with the artists, the humanities, and the social sciences. We need to all sit around a table together to theorize, intellectualize, and work out, if that is a wonderful vision, how we can do it together, working together. Because the wicked problems, the big challenges of humanity, whether it's clean air, water, I don't have to remind you that, power, electricity, I don't have to tell you about that, cannot be solved by the technocrats and the engineers alone. They need art, humanities, and social sciences as part of that.
Good. Thank you, Prof. Colleagues, any comments or further questions? I do not see any at this point. I think this day is a very important day for us in the College of Humanities, but also for us working in the Humanities Institute and associated with the Humanities Institute, and also participating in the projects of the Humanities Institute, because ultimately our point of departure is that of the system of Africology values that we draw on for our research, on, for, by, and for our communities. So that is something that the Ma'at Institute has addressed under the leadership of our Dean of the Applied Human Sciences, and also under the leadership in terms of the intellectualization of the African languages led by Professor Shlongwa, who we have here today. These are important points of departure, not only for changing the legacy of what we have inherited through colonization and apartheid, but basically to lay the groundwork and the ground and the foundations there for the future development of knowledge and knowledge systems that truly benefit our people. And that is the question about who benefits. For whom is this knowledge? And I think maybe we do not ask that question enough, because the knowledge that we produce for our community will determine the kind of society that we want, the kind of society in which we want to live our lives and in which we want to prosper. Colleagues, I want to bring this to a close. I want to thank our presenter, Professor Saleem Badat, and for his excellent address, the number of key points that he has raised, Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize, as well as Professor Shlongwa, who has been here and attended, and who will do the formal thanks. Just one last word from myself. Prof. Badat has also raised the issue about the variety of interventions that we do have in the universities, from students, from academics, from staff, from parent associations, from the government across our country. They are what they call diverse actors. They are still active, and it is important that we do interact on these issues, but also to determine the contribution that each one of us is making towards making our country, our continent, not only vibrant, epistemologically speaking, but also push us up into the forefront globally. Thank you so much.
Hey, ukuba mfishane ukuthi ngizocothama ngizozama yabona. Can you take this down a bit? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Program Director. Sanibonani, ninjani. Thank you very much for staying until such time that we close our program this afternoon. Let me begin by thanking our Program Director, who also happens to be the Director of the Humanities Institute within the College of Humanities at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Thank you very much, Professor Smith, for great facilitation, and I will request that we give them, all of them, a round of applause at the end. I'm sorry. At the end. So when I finish thanking all of them, and then we'll give them a big round of applause. So thank you very much, Professor Smith, for the excellent work. And I would also like to give a special thanks to our keynote address, Professor Saleem Badat. Thank you very much, Prof. Badat. I'm very excited that in your other portfolio, together with Prof. Zulu and other colleagues in the School of Arts, we were a recipient of a grant that seeks to promote the use of African languages, promoting the work of the artist within the arts, which was funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation. We are very grateful. Some of the initiatives that were part and parcel of that grant, we continue those within the filmmaking fraternity. We began script writing in isiZulu as part and parcel of one of those projects, and that work continues, and there is a lot of work that is currently taking place. We're also promoting filmmaking by our own students, and we are very, very grateful for that kind of work. Prof. Badat, in your talk, you have requested that it is important for African countries to work together and equitable. That's very, very important. When we enter into partnerships with other African countries, we need to make sure that we go on on an equal footing, so that we ensure that whatever we agree on, whatever partnership we build, the outcomes will actually benefit the countries. So it's very, very important. And I'm glad that within the College of Humanities, our DVC and head of Humanities College, Prof. Mkhize, is championing some of those initiatives within the African continent in line with the vision of University of KwaZulu-Natal to be a premier university of African scholarship. Prof. Mkhize led a delegation which visited Tanzania. And part of our partnership is with the Kiswahili Institute, because as the University of KwaZulu-Natal, we are teaching Kiswahili language. We are teaching Kiswahili. That is Swahili language. And our relationship with the Institute, we had to meet with the Vice Chancellor of that university, and I think you will be happy that like whilst we were there in Tanzania, we actually met a Zulu king who is speaking Swahili. And we, yes, we met a Zulu king, and some of the initiatives that like we'll be doing and some of the festivities we actually or were happy to join was a signing of a memorandum of understanding between our South African government and the Tanzanian government. South Africa will soon be introducing Kiswahili in schools. So as UKZN, we were the only university in South Africa to be represented in that. Thank you very much. So, Prof. Badat, we take your point very seriously, and you have asked a lot of questions with regard to issues of arts, science, working together. I think with the work that I think Prof. Smith also has interest in on digital humanities and digital methodologies, I think there is a lot that we will do together working with the sciences. So, with your presentation, Prof, we thank you very much. To our DVC, Prof. Mkhize. Prof, thank you very much. I think we need to acknowledge and thank you for your visionary leadership of the College of Humanities. In 2019, Prof. Mkhize came up with the idea of an institute, that as a College of Humanities, we need to come up with a Humanities Institute. And he did that. So since 2019, we've been having the Humanities Institute, and within the Institute, Prof. Smith alluded to various activities, including the Doctoral Academy, that are taking place there. And I must thank you, Prof, because you will remember that like a few years ago, our Honorable Minister of Higher Education, Dr. Blayton Zimande, was aware and noticed that like the arts, humanities, and social sciences were not receiving funding that they were deserving. And he started some work on the NIHSS. And based on that work, your contribution as well to the work of NIHSS, that has benefited a lot of our doctoral students within the humanities. I really do want to thank you very much for championing that. And I'm happy Prof. Zulu, sitting down there in the audience, has also contributed tremendously to that work and the work that we do as humanities, not only for the University of KwaZulu-Natal, but also for other universities. Because like what is important is the graduate attribute. What type of doctoral students are we producing as universities? Are these people going to change what is happening in our communities? Is life going to change for the better, as Prof. Badat has actually alluded to, in that we must make sure that like we work with communities. But like as we work with communities, which languages are we going to use as we communicate, as we engage communities? How are we going to address the problems that are there in our cities? Are we safe as women? Are we safe as children? If we are not, what is happening? Why we see a lot of GBV and so forth in our communities? So all those things, it's the work of the arts, of the humanities, of the social sciences working jointly. So with those, thank you very much. And I will now like to thank our corporate relations team, who have been working tirelessly together with Prof. Badat and the college in putting together the program for this afternoon. Thank you very much. Our photographers, thank you very much for the excellent work and for always supporting the College of Humanities. And to the beautiful audience, thank you very much for asking those questions, for engaging with the talk, and also for the comments that you have shared. So it's not ending today, so the struggle continues, and through dialogues, active engagement, and doing the work, I think we will make the difference as the humanities and the social sciences. With those words, siyabonga kakhulu. And I was not told to say this, but like I saw some eats outside. So please, as we go, please make sure that like you help yourself with some eats. And thank you very much. Thank you.